Hello, thank you for checking out this PAS Fundamental Friday video on Basque Txalaparta. My name is Elliot Godinez, and I am a general music teacher at Braddock Elementary School in Annandale, Virginia, where I run the Txalaparta Club for 4th and 5th grade students. This video is intended for the music teacher who would like to expand their knowledge into the realms of world music, and for any musician who is interested in interacting with this music called Txalaparta, be it through performing or for composing for Txalaparta. It's a fun and very accessible music, and I'm very happy to be sharing it with you today. What makes Txalaparta so accessible is that it is fundamentally a rhythmic game, what the performers call un juego. The word Txalaparta refers to both the music making and to the physical instrument itself, and the people that play Txalaparta are called Txalapartari. Txalaparta is very fluid in both the concept of it and in its performance practice. For example, the Txalaparta as a setup is fluid. I'll talk about its original physical setup, but there really is no standard for how many boards to use, whether or not they should be pitched, or even if it should be made out of wood. All that you need to play Txalaparta is a partner, an instrument of your own means, some large sticks, and an understanding of how the game works. To talk briefly about this setup here, I was able to get everything from Home Depot for roughly $100, and really the most expensive part was just the software stands. You could use different materials to pad the boards. Some people use a sponge-like material, but you can get away with using some folded towels. The Txalapartari have specially made sticks called maquilla that are conically shaped, but for my means, I was able to get some dowels cut up that function roughly in the same way. Txalaparta originates from the Basque region of northern Spain and southern France, and it is often seen as one of the many identifying symbols of the Basques, just like their unique language called Euskara. There are many legends surrounding its origin and use, such as it being used as a signal when fighting against the Romans, or it having ceremonial significance, to name a few examples. But what is most well documented is that it came from the process of pressing apples into cider on Basque farms. I'll discuss this process and part of its history now to establish what can be understood as one dimension of Txalaparta called Txalaparta Sahara, or traditional Txalaparta. Each family that would make cider had their own unique processes, but were largely similar. The first step involved workers using long staff-like tools to mash apples, and this is where the fundamental playing structure of Txalaparta comes in. Two people playing in an alternating fashion to create rhythm. It's an interesting cross-cultural phenomenon similar to blacksmithing, postage stamping, or some methods of grain farming that also involves using alternating rhythms. After the apples were all done, the workers would move the apples mashed to a separate machine that used long wooden boards to press the apples further. Once all the juice was squeezed out, they'd remove the waste as well as the boards, and at this point, often pick out the best sounding board to be played on. The board would be placed on a rooftop so it could dry in the sun and so that they could inform the neighbors that the cider process was almost complete. Finally, they'd celebrate the finished cider with a communal gathering where they would bring the board on the rooftop down, set it up on overturned baskets, sometimes cushioned with corn husks, and then play their game, un toque, on the board in the same alternating fashion as before. Txalaparta is unique in this way compared to the other work rhythms mentioned earlier. In many of those scenarios, the rhythms are primarily found just while the work is being done. The exception in Txalaparta is that the work rhythms are played after the tasks are completed and enjoyed as music. This was occurring across farmhouses, so just like each family had their own processes for making cider, they also had their own styles of playing. In fact, this style that I'm about to demonstrate can more specifically be traced back to 4 people, who around the early 20th century were among the very few people who even still played Txalaparta anymore. Due to many factors that we won't get into here, Txalaparta was an obscure tradition in the early 1900s, so it's possible that the way it was played before then was very different. This is just another testament to the fluidity of Txalaparta, however, as all of those other possible forms would be equally valid. In this traditional style and in the modern style, which I will discuss later, there is one simple rule: do not play when I play. There are roles for the 2 performers. The first player is called chacun, and the rhythmic ostinato that they play is also called chacun, and it sounds like this: chacun, 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 chacun. The chacun is the basic beat and rhythm of traditional Txalaparta. The name has no direct meaning, and it has often been spelled in various ways. The Txalapartari have at times likened it to the 2 sounds of a heartbeat. It's composed of 2 strokes, or golpes, each closer to each other in time than they are to the next chakun strokes. The second note is played louder and is felt as carrying the most weight, just like a downbeat. We can almost think of it kind of like a flam in our own vernacular, whereas a flam is two sounds characterized by their distance to each other that is elastic in some ways, except the difference is the chakun is very wide. Really, it almost resembles a triple feel as if it were in 6/8. But even this aspect of Txalaparta is fluid. When you play your chakun, you don't have to think in 6/8. Any two sounds will do. So again, to begin, we start off with our chakun strokes, and it goes like this. The game is completed by the second player, who is often referred to as the arena. This word does translate in the Basque language to mean limping, which is likely in reference to another origin story of Txalaparta that was being used to imitate the sounds of running horses. The arena plays the game by filling in the spaces left by the first player. Next, the second player can improvise on the chakun to create a melody. They can do this by resting, playing on just one or both of the rhythmic fragments that make up the chakun, or playing multiple strokes. Variety is achieved through the arena, playing any of these in a way that follows the rules of the game, don't play when I play. Those were the minimum requirements in order to improvise the beginning of a Txalaparta toque. In the old Txalaparta style, it's common for only the second player to improvise, which is helpful for teaching this music to younger students. In my time with the Txalaparta Club, I have found it best for myself to perform the chakun as an ostinato without improvising at all. At early stages of their musical development, students should have an understanding of steady beat and how to play along to a steady beat. However, the aspect of playing in between the beat to create an alternation takes a little practice to develop. The great thing again about Txalaparta is that any of these modifications can be made to allow participation for all levels of musical capabilities. All that matters is the alternating and the improvising. Once the game has been started, it can take off in any direction. The main goal is to play a game that both players are satisfied with. Through even more improvisation, performers can manipulate dynamics, they can play individual hands louder, basically like accents and taps. They can play on different parts of the board. And through tempo manipulation. This last skill requires a great deal more listening and teamwork to accomplish, but it is often the most exciting and virtuosic display of the Txalapartari's abilities. This form typically goes like this. We begin with the chakun. Once both players are satisfied with the pace, the arena, or even both players, begin to play only the two sounded chakun strokes. The goal is to sort of square out the rhythmic interpretation and even the inflection of the two sounds, so that what was once a quasi-swing feel becomes an equidistant alternating of 16th notes at a faster tempo. This section is sometimes called a lauco, meaning of four, referencing these four equidistant strokes. The improvisation continues in this fast section using any of the modifications that we've already discussed. The hardest part seems to be how do you determine when you are done. The moment that the game is over can be at any point, generally when both performers feel that it has run its full course. Endings seem to be the one component of any toque that are predetermined. Especially among Chalapartari who have been playing together for a long time, musical cues and shorthands are mutually understood to signal certain events. Sometimes an ending can be a precomposed groove, it can be an accelerando that reaches extreme speeds until one player simply stops or plays a specific sound, or it can even diminuendo and taper away. In this next example, I'll use a double stop to signal that the second player should trigger the ending sequence. From beginning to end, the game of Chalaparta Sahara lasts a relatively short time. It's the only piece of music that exists in that repertoire. There must be a dialogue between the two players, so if one is suggesting, hey, I want to play softer here, or hey, let's pick up the tempo here, the other player has to work with them, otherwise it's not a music of two anymore. Here's a very short toque that will try to hit on some of these ideas that I just laid out. In this last example, I was using multiple boards, but it's important to note that the original style typically started with just one. Adding more boards was something that pertains to what we can call modern Chalaparta or Chalaparta Beria. Chalaparta Beria is just a label to differentiate the older style from the newer style. The Chalapartari wouldn't necessarily say that they play Chalaparta Beria, they just play Chalaparta. For our purposes, however, we'll use Chalaparta Beria as sort of an umbrella term that covers all of the modern experimentation going on with Chalaparta. Ever since the Basque cultural revival of the 1960s and 70s, there has been quite the growth of Chalaparta across the Basque region, and more recently, some transnational interest as well. Chalapartari are always experimenting with their improvisations, with different settings of the instruments, and even different materials to construct their setups. A quick internet search can lead you to some incredible performers. I'm going to list some of them here for you to check out. There is Hushun Chalaparta, there is Oreka Teekis, you could find them on Spotify, and there is also Egura Chalaparta. All wonderful musicians and great human beings. I really encourage you guys to go check them out. The great thing about modern Chalaparta is that that's where we can come in to interact with it in a big way. There can sometimes be some apprehension in engaging with what we call world musics, but by many definitions of Chalaparta, and through encouragements also of many Chalapartari, it's all experimental and it's all valid, and we as percussionists should, I hope, feel that we can engage with this art form. In this final section of the clinic, I'm going to discuss notating for Chalaparta. I will begin by saying that nothing is standardized in Chalaparta, and for good reason. This holds entirely true for its notation. That being said, it's a fluid art form, and it is also a welcoming art form, so whatever you bring to it is valid, as long as you maintain and respect the spirit of its roots. There are several systems of notation that have been created over its history. Many of them borrow from each other, and they don't necessarily resemble classical and Western notation. They were initially used as a means of teaching new players. One of the early notation models involved a horizontal line that would depict time, and then vertical lines would indicate individual strokes. Lines above were for the first chekun player, and lines below were for the second erena player. Chalapartari don't typically use notations with regularity. Their notations are more like tools for education's sake, or to preserve some of their composed songs. For example, here's an example that I've used with students at our Chalaparta club. This can be used for teaching rhythms, especially as you can plug in any of the counting systems you use, like tati or takadimi syllables. In this way, Chalaparta can be used during the general music class setting as another opportunity for students to practice reading and playing rhythms. In a large class setting, you can also use this to practice call and response, imitation, composition, form, and melody. Just like each of their styles are different, the notations that Chalapartari come up with are really just for themselves, and therefore can sometimes use symbols or shorthands that only they understand. As far as has been seen, though, many of them are familiar with the system using vertical lines, and they base their notations off of that. I'm including some examples of things you may see in notations for Chalaparta. This example was given to me by the folks from Orakate Ekis. Here we can see dotted lines serve the same function as a rest symbol. Additional horizontal lines can also indicate specific boards, although some Chalapartari have even used numbers or pitch letter names to accomplish the same. But again, nothing is standardized. If you were to attempt to notate for the Chalaparta, the possibilities are really up to your own imagination and musical demands. Some colleagues of mine have written original works inspired by Chalaparta, where we experimented with using notation that more closely resembles what percussionists would be used to seeing. In these excerpts, we use a staff with any number of lines that corresponds to individual boards. We kept up with using the vertical lines stems up or stems down to denote each player, although in the piece Lureko Instrumentuak, shown here, the music really required two separate staves, which is also a valid notation. Noteheads were added to more clearly define which board is being indicated. Adding noteheads also opens up a realm of possibilities when it comes to specialized techniques. We also included headless stems to indicate rests, but again, anything you can come up with is valid as long as it suits your needs. If you would like to peruse these scores and learn more about them, I will include a link to a dissertation I wrote on Chalaparta, where my colleagues were kind enough to let me include these works in their entirety. To wrap up, Chalaparta has been included in film scores, chamber ensembles, wind ensembles, orchestras, and by percussion performance groups to various degrees. The music is not always written down, as it is an improvised tradition. When incorporating Chalaparta in any of these settings, it's important to remember that it is an instrument of two players, and that the alternating or splitting of rhythms has to be regularly maintained. It is a flourishing art form with a rich tradition, and I hope that you have taken something from this clinic that you feel you could use to create music in this style of your own. Thank you so much for watching.